Welcome into another edition of the Gig'em 24/7 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined as always by Brian Perroni. Little addition to the show today, a new graphic that some of you might notice. Big thank you right off the bat to a Gig'em 247 subscriber, Miss Newski, who reached out and created this graphic for us and sent it over. So wanted to start out the show with a big thank you for doing that. And Brian, we've got a lot to touch on, but how was your weekend overall? I know you headed out to a media day for um, a group, and just how was your weekend overall?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, everything's getting close. We got A&M football for the first weekend. They had a full pad practice in front of fans. Some high schools kicked off last week, but they all kick off uh, today or Monday, depending on when you listen to this. But yeah, so I mean, football's back. Like the off season has had a lot of storylines and stuff. Your Jimbo Fishers, your Nick Saban, all that kind of things. But finally, we got football to talk about, so I'm excited. That means it was a good weekend because I love Saturday afternoons in the fall.
Yeah, no doubt. I went out to a workout just to get out there. Saturday morning, saw a couple in-state kids, a couple really nice young prospects. Caleb Smith is a name I hadn't heard coming under the weekend, but a 2026 athlete at Allen who has already put up I believe he put up a track time of 10.5 this spring as a 2026 kid, and really
No
moves.
eighth grader should be running a
No eighth
sub
graders.
11. That's ridiculous. So
It's ridiculous, but just seeing, and that's why, he's got Utah and Texas Tech offers already, and seeing him go up against guys like Kyle Parker and Dalen McCutcheon, who's another player who I think is going to see his recruitment take off, was just good to see. So, I can never get out to enough workouts and practices, and it's just good to have it all back. And I know kids are kind of getting into workouts this week, and A&M had a open practice as well on Sunday. As they continue to roll on, had a little media day. Daryl Dickey met with the media. Elijah Robinson met with the media. Jimbo Fisher and players obviously met with the media as well. And then, just the open practice, I guess, there's it's one of those things where they held some guys out, obviously for precautionary reasons. But all eyes were kind of on the quarterback position. This was obviously the first chance for fans to kind of see Haynes King and Max Johnson as this quarterback battle goes on. And the theme coming out of the weekend is, Haynes King continues. He worked with the ones this weekend as those two kind of continue to flip flop. But Jeff Tarpley was obviously down there and mentioned the ball continues to come out of his hand well, and he's showing better anticipation and ball placement. And when I kind of hear that and talk with him about it, my first reaction is it was going to take time once he missed all of last season to get back in the flow. And he's probably, starting to find his rhythm now. And, that's a great problem for A&M to have, to sort through those two. But, I think that it's going to be close between those two. And obviously Jimbo Fisher, again, did not tip his hand either way, as expected. But what do you make of Haynes King kind of getting off to a strong start to fall camp here?
well, it's not surprising that he looked good. I mean, there's a reason that at one point he was a 5-star in high school by pretty much
Mm-hmm.
everybody, but it finished as a top 50 national guy. There's a reason he's that highly ranked, and that A&M was in a absolute battle with Tennessee to land him in the recruiting process. So, not a surprise he looked good. I still just I just think it'll be Max Johnson that comes out the starter. I
Yeah.
think the fact that he has starting experience in the SEC. I know Haynes King started the 2 games last year, but it was early Kent State and Colorado. But Max Johnson's got the season of experience, and I think that will probably be enough to win him the starting
Yeah.
job. But again, like we said last week, if Haynes King, if Haynes King trots out as the starter, it wasn't because he was, the best of a bad bunch or something. It means that he won it outright because
Yeah.
Max Johnson has also looked really good. So I don't think A&M can go wrong, or fans shouldn't be, fans should be excited no matter who trots out there because we know Max Johnson's ready. And if Haynes King beats him out, then whatever. And if it's Wigman, then he just looked like Superman this fall.
Yeah,
So yeah, whoever's out there has definitely earned it and deserves it. So that's a good problem to have, like you said.
no doubt. And when you talk to people, one of the things they mentioned with Max Johnson is just how the ball comes out of his hand. He seems to have, it's a longer delivery, but he seems to be able to make all the throws, can push the ball down the field, is accurate, has good touch on his throws. And just listening to players and coordinators and the coaches over the past, there's a definite feeling that they feel good about whoever comes out of this job, and whoever wins the job. You've heard Anais Smith mention the offense is going to be more explosive, and Daryl Dickey talked about both quarterbacks having really good off seasons as well. I think there's a feeling that the floor has kind of been raised, and there's the level of quarterback play is going to be higher this year, regardless of which guy has it, and there's depth at that position, which I think is a great thing to have. And you never know how a season's going to play out. A&M could have to rely on both of those guys this year at various points, or even Connor Wigman, depending on how things go as well. And so you're right. I mean, for Connor Wigman, this is a good chance to just get experience. Tarp mentioned he was under a bit of pressure yesterday, working with some backups and going, with kind of the mixing and the matching. But I think this is a good time for him to have to go through that and have to work through, the offense maybe not finding its rhythm, and him having to maybe create some plays and work through that. This is the great time to do that when you have some experienced options, and you can kind of grow at the same time. So, a lot of depth in that quarterback room. And again, that's a great problem to kind of have. And, speaking of depth, Jimbo Fisher was talking about this a lot yesterday on a couple fronts, and he talked about it last week too. And with A&M holding some guys out, with minor injuries and coming back from things, you're really having a chance to see this depth. Yesterday, we're missing a couple guys in the secondary, and Tarp's big takeaway from the day was, there wasn't a whole lot of drop off with other guys coming in, and that speaks to that level of competition. With you've got guys like Jalen Jones or Brian George there. Miles Jones, reportedly left the field with an injury yesterday, so there's no word on the extent of his injury yet. But there's guys behind that are ready to step in and ready to contribute, and so that puts A&M in a really good spot. And it's all based on how they've recruited the past couple of years and level of talent that they have recruited.
No, for sure. And outside of the offensive line, which we've talked about as well, I mean, yeah, the depth on this team is really good, and that's not something they've had. Last year, you look at quarterback. For example, when Haynes King went down, I mean, Calzada came with no experience. He struggled, but there was absolutely nobody after him. And if A&M had played in the bowl game, I mean, there's a chance that a true freshman walk-on would have been the starting QB. That's not going to be the case this year. But I mean, like the defensive line. I mean, yeah, some of these young guys still need the experience. I mean, they have a chance and should be really, really good. They need experience, but still, you can sub in defensive line all day and be really good. I mean, this is a rotation of 12 guys, that can go in, which is nobody should have, that nobody else in the SEC has that. So yeah, this is and the secondary, yeah, is really, I mean, there's a bunch of guys with starting experience. Deuce Harmon has started. Jalen Jones is a 2-year starter. I mean, Damani Richardson is a 3-year starter. Antonio Johnson. I mean, it's just, a ton of guys. Brian George has starting experience. And then you have, some really, really talented backups. And so yeah, I mean, it's, like you said, depth is not going to be an issue except on the offensive line. And obviously you don't want Devon Odchain to go down. A&M does have the depth at running back. They just don't have a player like him. I mean, most schools don't have even one player like him. So it's not like, it's not an indictment that that there's not somebody with his speed and ability backing him up. But I mean, there are some good running backs. But yeah, that position you don't want anything happen to. But I mean, really everywhere else they can afford, almost anything happen. You don't want injuries, but they can survive it, unlike in previous years.
And I think that was the encouraging part about hearing, a guy like Marshall Harris was able to come up with an interception yesterday during the 11-on-11 portion. A guy like him could be relied upon early because there's not a ton of depth at the linebacker position. So depending on how injuries play out, obviously Andre White, Adrian Cooper, Chris Russell are some of the the key figures there, Terry and Lee as well. So they've got some pieces, and Adrian Cooper seems to have taken another step forward. But you mentioned the defensive line, and I think it's a really good sign when you continue to hear McKinley Jackson get mentioned as a guy that's had a really good start to fall camp, and Jimbo Fisher mentioned him as kind of a guy that stepped into a leadership role, and the feeling of being in year 3 now and needing to kind of take that next step. And I think competition also creates that, kind of looking behind you and seeing that A&M just brought in like a bunch of guys like Walter Nolan and Marcus Burris. Competition, as Jimbo Fisher loves to say, competition helps, negate complacency and anything like that. So, the competition on that side of the ball is going to be fun to watch all year long. And you mentioned even a guy like Deuce Harmon. He's a guy that, he's backing up Antonio Johnson right now, which is kind of a tough place to be. But, he's going to be needed at certain points this year. And the other guy I think it's encouraging, just off of Leon O'Neal departing for the NFL, is to hear the emergence of Jordan Gilbert. And it's a guy that, there's obviously been a lot of buzz around him since he got on campus. And Tarp mentioned yesterday, he was around the football a lot yesterday. And I think that's encouraging to see as well.
Oh, no, for sure. And you talked about Adrian Cooper, man. Go back to his recruitment, and it's just he was a bit of a late target on the A&M radar. And then, he had told you you could report it. I signed with somebody. He didn't say who. He was announcing at the All-American Bowl. He said, I signed with somebody, and I think it was pretty obvious it was A&M. But it was just funny, even after that, because he hadn't publicly announced in schools, some schools weren't aware that he signed. I mean, he was still picking up offers. I think Florida State still offered him, after – I was like, well, I mean, he had signed. That's illegal. But, I don't think there's a national database where they could see that. But, I mean, that was, man, how big was that for A&M? Like, I think we knew at the time, like, I mean, he's a good player, but never thought, I mean, he's, without him, I mean, you talk about linebackers. There's only 6 linebackers on scholarship right now, and 2 are true freshmen who are, need to add some weight to their frames. So without him, I mean, that would be a completely different defense. So, it's just funny that just, like I said, just sort of late, addition, and LSU was not quite after him until basically he signed with A&M, and they started recruiting him harder too. And they were trying to get him to hold off on signing. So that was a big one. It's just fun looking back at the recruiting of some of these guys.
No doubt. And that's you mentioned that's a name that, he had kind of mentioned, okay, I'm going to wait until the late signing period. And then rumors started to kind of come out the second to third day that he had actually signed with a school and confirmed with us and goes, yeah, sure, go ahead, publish it. For sure. And it was one of those schools was LSU that was trying to get him to hold off. And you mentioned that's a huge guy. That was a huge guy at the time to be able to keep out of, keep away from LSU. And Jordan Gilbert as well is a guy that, LSU started to step up later in the process. So to see both of those guys as 2 of the guys A&M could rely on moving forward, Adrian Cooper had an interception as well.
I think Bryce Anderson did too. I know he's not from Louisiana, but almost close, and he wasn't a long time LSU.
Former Louisiana commitment. Yep. Yeah. And so some of those guys that, those recruiting battles that fans follow so closely, and how those guys are starting to step forward and be able to contribute is huge. And you mentioned what a godsend Adrian Cooper is being just in terms of that linebacker room, and the excitement level around him is really, really high. So, I think the defense is in a pretty good spot heading into this year with the depth and the way that they recruited, which is kind of what we expected to happen. Speaking of recruiting, it was a big weekend on that front as well. A&M got another commitment, had a couple other targets making decisions as well, and got a couple others coming up. So we're going to touch on the latest on the recruiting trail after a quick break. Welcome back to the Gig'em 24/7 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley. Brian, A&M added to their class this weekend again and went back to the Northeast for another guy to get Northeast offensive lineman Nikhil Bertrand. Comes from the same school as Tyreek Chappell. He announced his commitment to A&M on Saturday night after taking a visit to A&M in late July, and kind of was a guy that had been trending A&M's way. Former Colorado commitment as well. I know you, Brian, you've talked to him a little bit. Just give everybody kind of an idea of what A&M is getting in him as a player.
Man, he's a funny kid. Definitely confident in his abilities. So, if he gets to do interviews during his time in A&M, fans are going to like him. But Nikhil was committed to Colorado pretty early in the process. I mean, Colorado saw this 6'7", 310-pound kid who, looks like how you draw up a tackle prospect, and they jumped on him early. He ended up decommitting from the Buffs back early June. Had taken a visit. I think it was a 4-day visit to A&M back in April. It was the same weekend that Shandavian Bradley was there. People saw pictures of those two together, but that's when he was offered. I mean, it's hard not to offer a guy that comes in, like I said, when he's 6'7", 315, relatively lean. I mean, he can reshape it some, but not a fat kid or anything like that. I know he's not the highest ranked kid, and it's sort of that floor ceiling deal. The floor is not incredibly high, but the ceiling potentially is. And there's a reason that, Auburn was after him. They were actually after him as a defensive lineman, even though he doesn't play that. But Penn State had offered, Kentucky and Syracuse he had taken official visits to as well. I think with A&M taking 5 offensive linemen in this class, they can take a flyer on a guy like Beecher. And, they had offered from Melissa, Trevor Gooseby, and, somewhat similar like that, a bit raw now, but has a high ceiling. And if it doesn't work out, then I hate to talk about the transfer portal. I don't even like talking about it with freshmen, yet less a guy who's not even in there. But if things don't work out with any of these guys, I mean, it's easy to transfer now without having to sit out. So, I mean, I don't think there's a real downside to it, but the upside is potentially really good. I mean, I had talked about Trevor Gooseby, when he was committed to TCU as a guy that, hey, he's not getting a ton of attention, but, he may be one of those that you look back when he's projected as a first round pick. I mean, like, how come he didn't get more in high school? Well, Nikhil is possibly, that same sort of type. And, if not, then he provides depth and, just interesting. And you talked about Philadelphia. I mean, they have, so just from his high school, he'll be the third one. He'll join Tyreek Chappell and Elijah Judy. Eni White is a true freshman from Philadelphia. And then just across the river from Camden, you've got Fadil Diggs. And then, a little bit further from Camden, maybe 30 minutes from Philadelphia is Isaiah Rakes. It's sort of seen as like a suburb. So, I mean, it's Elijah Robinson's from Camden. You can really see his hand there recruiting these guys. But I mean, I've covered A&M for a long time, and only before Jimbo Fisher, only really even covered like one guy from the Northeast. Matthew Featherston is a name people might remember. He's from upstate New York, I believe. And Les Kenning, the old offense coordinator, sort of found him in a like 8th tier all-star game. But I did. It's like didn't cover anybody, and now it's you and I are getting really familiar with all these Northeast schools. We're able to name a bunch of these. Chase Pasantis, another guy committed from New Jersey in this class. So it's just a completely different game under Jimbo Fisher. It's fun to cover for sure.
No doubt, you learn a little bit about that side of ball and watch a lot of film from that area, and you start to think, okay, I recognize Northeast Stadium. I've watched enough film from out there now, and some of those coaching staff talking with them about Tyreek Chappell when we were kind of covering his recruitment. You mentioned it, like being 6'7", you can definitely see why A&M would be high on him as kind of a developmental piece, and from a technique standpoint, footwork, hand placement, he's got room to grow. There's no doubt about that, but just even talking to sources about other guys in the state, when we were talking with people about Isaiah Robinson last year, now a Baylor commit, one point mentioned to me, guys that are 6'6", 6'7", grow on trees all the time. And if you can get them in your program and be able to work with them, same with a guy like Demetrius Crownover, and at his size, and being able to work with him, if you can get him in your program and believe in your development of where you can get them to, it's a guy worth taking an opportunity on and getting him in your program. And from a depth standpoint, being able to work with him and teach him, some of the technique stuff that you think he needs to work on. And A&M looking to the rest of the offensive line class now, TJ Shanahan and Cajun Jones kind of stand out as the two, I think, remaining targets along the offensive line. TJ Shanahan's a guy I think we both have crystal balls in for, and still continue to feel really good about that timeline. I think it could happen at any point. He's told some people that he wouldn't mind, waiting a little bit longer into the season, but is really a guy I think could make a decision at any point. And Caden Jones is going to take visits to Florida and A&M during the season as well, and think those are kind of the two battling it out for him. Obviously, he's got some ties to A&M, and so Brian, looking at that, that's not a bad offensive line class. If you're able to add Shanahan and add Caden Jones, you've got some nice pieces along the offensive line, and especially in a year where there's not like a dominant offensive tackle in the state. You're going to take some guys you have to develop.
Yeah, we talked about it last week. Sort of the key there is the versatility. Chase Basantis is a high school tackle. He could stay at tackle. A&M has talked to him about guard. Colton Thomason is a high school guard who's now moving to tackle, could play either tackle or guard. We thought when he was, higher in the 300s, we thought he'd be a guard, but, I think he's got a real chance to play tackle now. TJ Shanahan is a tackle that could play guard, could play tackle. A&M has talked to him about any of the positions. Betrand and Caden Jones are the only guys who are definitely tackles. Caden Jones is actually pretty similar to N'Keal, sort of that same frame, a little raw. We saw him at camp this summer. He flashed. He had his moments where he flashed, but also a little raw, but really good. And his mom is an Aggie. His uncle, Marcus Jasmine, played for A&M. So A&M's going to be tough to beat. He did really like Florida, and, Florida may cause him to hold off on a decision for a little bit. But would not be shocking to see the three already in the boat, plus TJ Shanahan and Caden Jones as that 5-man offensive line class. And it's a good class.
Yeah, it's a good class, no doubt. And some definitely some pieces there to work with, and it goes back to what we mentioned about Colton Thomas and the fact that he's able to play tackle as well, and has built that familiarity. Will play there as a senior, I think, is huge, just to build that experience and bring that versatility. Wasn't all good news though. Unfortunately, A&M did miss out on a couple guys: Shelton Sampson, Darian Gillette. Gillette's a guy that I think A&M is going to continue to recruit. We were asked about, what does A&M do at that third linebacker spot with Damian Sanford and Anthony Hill in the class. I think they'll, probably evaluate some guys, but they'll continue to push for a guy like Darian Gillette all the way to signing day. They've still got an official visit to use. And so if they can show, good linebacker play and some of that, just checking in. I know Texas held a significant lead for most of July. In the end, it did end up being pretty close between A&M and Texas. So, I think that's a guy A&M will continue to recruit and continue to push for, and just see what happens this fall and go from there.
Yeah. So A&M's also still after Grayson Howard, Pup Howard. He's a linebacker from Jacksonville, Florida, that's committed to South Carolina. South Carolina actually, has higher expectations this year than in many years, but if they struggle, that could, he could be one that looks around a little bit. Tausili Akana has been to A&M twice, linebacker from Utah. He's originally from Hawaii. He's in Utah now. He likes Oklahoma a lot, and his sister goes to Texas. So, those are other players that are, other teams that are going to be involved, but Akana is definitely one that has interest, with his trips to A&M. He plays more with his hand down now, but A&M worked him out at linebacker a year ago when he was offered in a private workout and liked him there. So, there's some names, and then Damian Sanford wasn't on the radar even a month before he committed. He came to A&M, dominated, picked up things. You don't see a ton of senior year evals anymore, but they're not, they're not unheard of. And so, A&M would be looking at that, and also quarterbacks same way. The quarterbacks are already on their radar, but I think they'll be watching the senior years of a lot of guys, while also going after the top national targets still.
No doubt. And you mentioned, with two guys already in the class and looking to add to that third person, they can also afford to be a little patient. Just even looking at last year, Jihad Campbell's a guy that was committed to Clemson, reopens his recruitment late in the process, and A&M and Alabama kind of get in there late. And Adrian Cooper, we just talked about earlier, A&M can, afford to see, if there's any coaching staff shuffling at the end of the year and do some late targets and merge that A&M is able to get into the mix for. There's always a couple of those guys every cycle. And so, to kind of round out that class, A&M will kind of keep an eye on things and continue to stay in touch with some of those guys that they, missed out on or are committed elsewhere and go from there. And, A&M, there's two other decisions coming up, Cedric Baxter and Kylan Jackson. Of those two, I think A&M probably has a better chance with Kylan Jackson. I think Cedric Baxter, Texas is probably in a good spot for him right now. So Kylan Jackson for me is kind of the one that of those two A&M probably has a better chance with. And then, they remain in contact with Peyton Bowen, and, Notre Dame feels confident they'll be able to keep him, but OU and A&M are continuing to kind of plug away there behind the scenes and see if they can flip them. And both had them on campus late in July. And so, I think looking at the safety position, Kylan Jackson and Peyton Bowen are kind of the two A&M continues to plug away at.
Yeah. So Kylan Jackson actually, he's supposed to announce on Monday. So by the time you're listening to this, he might already have announced. But if he sticks to that, I expect it to be LSU. He's from Zachary, which is basically a suburb of Baton Rouge. A&M is working to get him to delay that announcement. He's been on campus a bunch of times. He likes, he likes what he saw sort of out of the Leon O'Neal role the last couple of years. And then another guy, we've listed him at cornerback because he was, but I think he's a better fit at safety. And so if we're talking about safety fits and sort of that, and one of those spots, don't discount Tony Mitchell. He's 5-star kid committed to Alabama. He showed up at A&M's pool party. He's still going to give A&M a long look throughout the recruiting process. He hasn't taken any official visits yet. I would expect him to do so in the fall, and I think A&M will get one. So, don't discount him either. And so they have Dalton Brooks committed. They're looking at trying to flip Peyton Bowen. If you get Tony Mitchell or Kylan Jackson, I mean, that's not just a good class, that's an elite class of safeties coming off a year when you signed Jacoby Matthews, who was, I don't think he was quite a 5-star, but really close to that 5-star range.
Yeah, pretty close. And the other guy kind of lurking in the wings if they were to miss on guys is Ramir Stewart and kind of another option that.
Hey, where's he from?
Yeah, from Northeast. Yeah.
Another Philadelphia
kid. And so Imhotep, should I say, not Northeast.
Yeah, they're going to have to open up a cheesesteak place or a roast pork sandwich place in College Station. Let these guys feel at home.
Absolutely. And former teammate of Eni White. You're right. Like, they're just continuing to kind of go in that area. And, when we're putting together our high school football schedules, almost now it's becoming like, okay, one trip's got to be to the Northeast to go see all those guys. And so, because there's just so many of them that are kind of building in that area. You're right. I mean, Tony Mitchell's a guy, I was asked about him after the visit weekend and said, look, A&M's just going to continue to stay on him. He's been to campus several times. And so, it's always going to be tough to flip a kid out of Alabama, but he's really high on A&M. And so, they're just going to continue to kind of stay engaged there. When I was sticking in the secondary, Steve Wiltfong caught up with Arlington Martin cornerback. He also plays quarterback actually a little bit. Is Javian Toviano. He mentioned we had kind of talked about him as potentially a guy that can make a decision before the year. Now looking to, it looks like, push his decision into the season and take some visits for games this fall. What did you make of his comment? He talked a lot about A&M feeling like home, and then talked about how, he was very much open to leaving the state with Michigan and LSU and Oregon. What did you kind of make of where things kind of stand with him on based on what he said to Steve Wiltfong?
So Javian has not done many interviews. I mean, I think we had told the story is one day where he just
Yeah.
tweeted out, "Hey, I'm open to interviews today," and he just all day he just sat there, doing interviews, and that's really been it.
Yeah.
So it's most of stuff we get on him is from talking to a lot of different people. So it was interesting to get what he says, but it did not surprise me that he mentioned out of state. His only official he's taken so far is to Michigan, and I know he really liked it up there a lot. And then where did he go in July? The weekend he was at OSU and did not end up making it to A&M. So I mean, you got to look at actions, and that's where he's been visiting. So that doesn't surprise me. But he did say that A&M felt the most like home, and that's
Yeah.
always a good thing. His brother is at Rice. I think he's still at Rice. If not, he played running back at Rice, and so his family's used to having them relatively close to home and be able to see games. Now that's they're not going to try and make him go anywhere, but when you're used to that, it doesn't hurt if he's even closer than Rice down the road in College Station.
No doubt. And, A&M's going to continue to push him, to get on campus. If they could get him on campus early in the season, I think that certainly helps. And, one of the things we've always seen with guys is A&M will definitely push to get him in on that Friday night for a home game, do the midnight yell like they did with Evan Stewart, and then be able to have him for the entire weekend and kind of show off the home atmosphere. And so I know A&M feels like if they can get a kid on campus for a game and be able to host them, they have a chance. And another guy kind of looking at a visit in September is Hakeem Williams. Andrew Ivins caught up with him over the weekend. He mentioned he's looking at the Miami game, which would likely be, I'm assuming, another multi-day visit of coming in potentially on the Friday, or he's got a game Friday, so it'd probably have to be Saturday morning and potentially stay into Sunday, which bodes well because Andrew also mentioned that he's kind of looking now at, when talking with people, a late September, early October timeline, and he confirmed that this weekend that a commitment was at least on the horizon. So for A&M, I think to get him in, especially for that Miami game and against another team you're battling with for him, is huge, and certainly doesn't hurt to get him back on campus for a multi-day visit right before he makes a decision.
Yeah, it's a 5-star wide receiver. I think he's ranked as a number 2 receiver in the country. If not, it's really high. It actually, so, this is interesting. We talked last week about the coaching position change. Well, the new wide receiver coach is James Coley, who recruits South Florida for the Aggies. It's James Coley. So Coley has been the lead on him and is now his position coach. And that certainly doesn't hurt at all, if you are able to play for the coach recruiting you. He also spent several days at A&M in June. Now, Georgia and Florida State both are making runs, and he's had sort of different leaders throughout the process. But A&M has been the one constant, and right now would be in the best shape. So, I mean, that would be big. He's sort of Chris Marshall is just freaky athletic, so I don't want to compare to that. But he's sort of that type where he's got speed, athleticism, and size. Evan Stewart is just go down the field. He's like Jalen Waddle. He's fast and avoids a tackle. Hakeem Williams is more like Chris Marshall, and those are the kind of receivers A&M just doesn't have on campus. They do now with Marshall, and even with Noah Thomas showing some flashes. But he would be huge to a receiving core that's getting there is young, but it's getting to be pretty good, at least from what we've seen in practice so far.
No doubt. And, it doesn't hurt that a guy like Keith Brown seems to be kind of emerging in a role now and was working with the ones on Sunday. And, for a guy like that, for the South Florida kids to be able to see somebody else step in their position and be able to contribute doesn't hurt at all. So, that's going to be one to watch. And, it'll be a big game. A&M. I would expect that to be one of A&M's biggest recruiting weekends of the fall. Obviously, having Miami.
Oh, it's an 8:00 game on Saturday night. It'll be loaded because kids that have Friday games all over the country have time to fly in on Saturday, drive in on Saturday. So yeah, that game will be insane when it comes to, because both teams should be ranked pretty high. So that'll be a fun one.
And it'll kind of be A&M's opportunity because obviously we've mentioned before that kind of road stretch they have right afterwards. That'll be their last chance to kind of get recruits in before they head out on the road for a little bit. So, I think A&M will certainly look to take advantage of that weekend and have just about all their top targets in town. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and sign off for today, and keep an eye on the recruiting trail, and see what the kind of the next couple of weeks bring, with guys kind of getting back into fall camp. It'll be interesting to see if a lot of the guys who have waited until this point to make decisions at this point kind of take it into the season, and or if there's some more decisions coming up. But we will certainly have you guys covered on all the latest over on Gig'em 247. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you're watching on there, to get a notification every time a new video drops. On Spotify and iTunes, you can also listen to us on there. Give us a 5-star review if you like what you hear. So go ahead and do that. Otherwise, thanks again for joining us. Have a great week, and we'll see you guys again soon.